On a freezing Christmas Eve, a proud businessman lost everything he believed made him strong, his wealth, his certainty, and even the family who once trusted him. Hours later, a tragic accident left him stranded in the snow, and the only person who stopped to help was the same humble man he had humiliated earlier that day. What looked like the worst night of his life became the moment that broke his pride, healed his heart, and saved his soul. This is proof that nothing happens without purpose, and that sometimes God uses the coldest nights to warm the places inside us we refuse to face. In a quiet town tucked between snowy hills and evergreen forests, Christmas always arrived with a gentle kind of magic. Warm lights danced in every window, children laughed as they built crooked snowmen, and the scent of cinnamon drifted through the cold December air. Yet among all that warmth, two very different lives moved side by side. On the hill above the town stood a large stone house with tall glass windows that glowed like a beacon at night. It belonged to Jonathan Hale, a 48-year-old businessman known for his sharp words, expensive suits, and the belief that success was measured only by numbers, not kindness. His life was polished on the outside, wealth, reputation, influence, but inside something cold had been growing for years. His wife had left long ago, unable to live with a man whose heart was harder than winter ice. His teenage daughter spent holidays with her mother, avoiding the silence of his home. Jonathan told himself he preferred it that way. Feelings slow you down, he liked to say. Down the hill, in a modest little house with a crooked porch and a roof patched more times than anyone could count, lived Samuel Ortiz, a humble handyman in his early 50s. He had a gentle face, rough hands, and eyes that carried both sorrow and hope, a strange but beautiful mix. Years ago, he had lost his wife, and since then he had lived alone with his old brown dog, Milo, who followed him everywhere, limping slightly from age. Samuel didn't have much, but he had faith, and every morning he whispered, "Lord, give me strength to be useful to someone today." On that Christmas Eve morning, their paths crossed as Samuel walked through town carrying a small box of tools. Jonathan's black SUV slid sharply on the icy road, stopping only inches from Samuel. The businessman rolled down his window, irritation burning in his voice. "Watch where you're walking." Samuel stepped back gently. "Sorry, sir. Ice is tricky today. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Just move," Jonathan snapped, speeding off. The townspeople saw the scene and shook their heads. They were used to Jonathan's temper, but Samuel simply brushed the snow off his jacket and whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, may his heart find peace someday." Despite the harsh encounter, Samuel's day continued with small acts of kindness, fixing a neighbor's broken heater without charging a cent, delivering firewood to an elderly woman, and giving Milo half of his lunch because the dog had been shivering more than usual. To Samuel, Christmas wasn't about gifts or lights. It was about being a light. Meanwhile, Jonathan returned to his silent home, pacing through rooms decorated by professionals but lacking any warmth. A lonely tree blinked in the corner, its lights flickering like a lifeless heartbeat. He checked his phone. No messages, no family, no plans. Just work emails and reminders. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the town in white. Two men, two lives, two hearts, one hardened by pride, one softened by struggle, were unknowingly moving toward the night that would change everything. As evening settled over the town, the Christmas lights shimmered like tiny stars reflected on the snow. But for Jonathan Hale, the night brought a storm he never saw coming. He had driven into town for a last-minute business meeting, an unnecessary one, according to everyone who knew him. But Jonathan preferred work to silence. Numbers didn't judge him, and spreadsheets never reminded him of the family he'd pushed away. As he walked out of the cafe where the meeting was held, he slipped on an icy patch and dropped his phone onto the pavement. The screen shattered instantly. Annoyed, he muttered under his breath and bent down to pick it up, but as he did, the cafe's manager approached him with a tense look. "Mr. Hale, about your payment earlier," she said carefully. "Your card was declined." Jonathan stiffened. "Impossible. Run it again." "I already did, twice." People inside the cafe turned their heads. Whispers rose immediately, soft at first, then sharper. "Isn't he the rich guy? What happened to him? He probably finally ran out of people to step on." Jonathan felt heat rise in his face. He tried another card, declined. He tried a third, declined again. A young man near the counter whispered loudly, "Guess money can disappear faster than he treats people." The manager lowered her voice. "Sir, the bank sent a notification to your email. Something about accounts being frozen due to an internal investigation." Jonathan blinked. Frozen? That's absurd. But deep down, he knew exactly what it was. His company had been audited recently. Someone inside must have triggered a compliance hold. Standard procedure, but disastrous timing. His assets, accounts, and even credit lines were now inaccessible until everything was cleared. The murmurs behind him grew heavier, like stones thrown one by one. That's what arrogance gets you. Even on Christmas Eve, he talks to everyone like they're beneath him. Jonathan clenched his jaw, ignoring the humiliation boiling inside him. Without his cards working, without cash, without even a functional phone, he had no way to pay for the coffee he'd already consumed. Before the manager could say anything else, a voice spoke from behind him. "I'll take care of it." Jonathan turned. Samuel stood there, covered in snowflakes, holding a small grocery bag in one hand and Milo's leash in the other. His expression was calm, almost gentle. "You don't have to do that," Jonathan muttered. "I know," Samuel replied, "but it's Christmas. Let me—" The room fell silent, but Jonathan's pride surged. "I don't need charity, especially not from you." Samuel didn't flinch. He simply nodded, paid the bill quietly, and walked out without another word. Behind Jonathan, laughter erupted from a group near the window. "Imagine that! The mighty Jonathan Hale, rescued by a handyman." He stormed out, chest tight, humiliated more than he'd been in years. Outside, the cold wind cut across his face like a warning. Snow swirled through the air. His SUV, which he'd parked near the edge of the street, was now barely visible beneath a sheet of white. He scraped the windshield with his bare hands, sweating in the freezing air, muttering curses between breaths. For the first time in a long time, the world wasn't bending to his will. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hale felt small. He didn't know it yet, but humiliation was only the beginning. A much colder, much darker moment was waiting for him before the night was over. Snow kept falling as Jonathan finally cleared his windshield enough to drive. His hands were numb, his breath sharp in the cold. He climbed into the SUV, slammed the door, and gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw tight. Humiliation burned in his chest like a hidden fire. He had always believed strength meant never needing anyone. Tonight had proved how fragile that kind of strength truly was. He leaned back, eyes closed, trying to calm the storm inside him. But instead of silence, his mind replayed the scene from the cafe. The judgmental looks, the whispered insults, the shock on his own face as his cards kept failing. And then the moment that hurt his pride most of all. Samuel, the humble handyman he had nearly run over that morning, stepping in to help him without hesitation. Jonathan let out a slow breath. "Why would he do that?" he muttered. "Why help someone who treated him like that?" He started the engine, but instead of pulling onto the road, he sat there, watching the snow fall like tiny fragments of truth. Meanwhile, across town, Samuel walked home slowly, Milo padding beside him. The dog barked once, sensing the heaviness in his owner's heart. "I know, boy," Samuel whispered, patting Milo's head. It hurt him. even if he pretended it didn't. Samuel's breath formed white clouds in the cold night. His gaze drifted upward toward the falling snow. "Lord," he murmured softly, "some hearts are frozen because they've been wounded more than we know. If tonight was meant to shake him, then let it also guide him." There was no anger in Samuel's voice, no resentment, only a quiet understanding that life had a strange way of teaching what pride refused to learn. In his small living room, he lit a single candle beside a wooden nativity set carved by his late wife. Its glow filled the room with gentle warmth. Samuel knelt and whispered, "Father, soften that man's heart, not for my sake, but for his. Let this night open his eyes." He didn't pray for revenge. He didn't pray for justice. He prayed for transformation. And across town, without knowing why, Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest. An ache he couldn't explain, like a whisper buried under years of noise. The night was far from over, and the lesson God had prepared for him had just begun. Before we continue, if this story is touching something inside you, write "I believe everything has a purpose" in the comments. It may sound simple, but those words help this message reach more hearts tonight. And listen, over 92% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed yet. If you're one of them, take a moment to join this family. It's free. It helps the channel grow, and it means you won't miss the next story that might speak exactly to what you're going through. Now, let's return to this Christmas night, because what happens next is the moment everything changes. Jonathan finally pulled away from the cafe, headlights cutting through the storm as he drove toward the outskirts of town. The road was nearly invisible under the thick blanket of snow, and the wind howled against the windshield like a restless spirit. He turned onto the long, winding road that led back to his hilltop home. Halfway up, the SUV's traction warning light began to blink. The tires slid once, then twice, struggling to grip the ice-coated pavement. "Come on!" Jonathan muttered, gripping the wheel tighter, but the storm had grown fiercer. Snow whipped sideways, stinging like needles. The engine groaned, then a loud crack, a sputter, silence. Jonathan stared at the dashboard. The engine had died. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. The storm raged around him, swallowing the sound of his frustration. "You've got to be kidding," he whispered, realizing with a jolt of fear that he was stranded halfway between town and home, with no phone, no bank access, and now no vehicle. For a moment, anger surged. He punched the steering wheel. "Why is everything going wrong tonight?" But as the words left his mouth, a strange calm swept over the storm. The snowfall slowed, the wind softened, and for just a heartbeat, the world fell quiet, as if waiting. Jonathan looked through the windshield and noticed something glowing faintly through the trees, warm light flickering like a lantern. "What?" He stepped out of the SUV, shivering as the cold wrapped around him. Snow crunched beneath his shoes as he walked toward the light. Pushing through a line of evergreens heavy with frost, he found himself standing before an old stone chapel he had never noticed before. Its door was slightly open, a single candle burned inside. Hesitant but drawn in, he stepped closer. Inside, the tiny chapel was simple: wooden pews, a handmade cross, and a small nativity scene carved from olive wood. The warmth of the candlelight softened the air. Jonathan sat down on the first bench. He hadn't been in a church on Christmas Eve in more than 20 years. He stared at the tiny figure of the baby Jesus in the manger and felt something loosen in his chest. Memories he had tried to bury. His daughter, years ago, singing carols by the tree. His wife smiling shyly at him on Christmas morning. Simpler times, before ambition swallowed tenderness. A quiet voice rose inside him, trembling like a fragile truth. "You have everything, except what matters." For the first time in years, Jonathan bowed his head, not to pray, not yet, but to listen. Outside, the snow began to fall gently again, no longer violent, soft, almost protective, and on the road behind him, a pair of footprints began to form in the fresh snow. Someone was coming. Jonathan remained inside the small chapel, the candlelight flickering gently against the stone walls. For the first time in years, he felt something other than anger or control. He felt still, fragile, human. But peace never stays long when a soul is being reshaped. A sudden blast of cold wind burst through the open door, snapping him back to reality. He turned sharply. The storm had returned, stronger than before, snow swirling so fast it looked like white smoke. He hurried outside, shielding his face with his arm. His SUV, half buried in snow, sat tilted at an angle, with the driver's side door wide open. Jonathan froze. He hadn't left it open. He took a step toward the road, heart pounding as the wind roared in his ears. Someone had been there recently. Footprints, half blurred by snow, led away from the car and disappeared into darkness. He scanned the road. Nothing. Then a distant, muffled sound broke through the wind, a low moaning, like someone calling for help. Jonathan hesitated. Fear crawled up his spine. His first instinct was to retreat back inside the chapel, to wait out the storm, to avoid whatever trouble might be waiting in the dark. But something soft and persistent rose in his chest, the echo of Samuel's calm voice, the memory of his quiet kindness, despite being mistreated hours earlier. Jonathan swallowed, steadied his breath, and followed the sound. The wind pushed against him with every step. His shoes slipped on the ice. Snow soaked through his coat. The road curved sharply to the right, and just beyond that turn, he saw it. A small sedan had skidded off the icy road and crashed nose first into a snowbank, its hazard lights blinking weakly. One of the front wheels spun uselessly in the air. Jonathan hurried closer. "Hello? Can you hear me?" he yelled over the wind. A faint voice responded, trembling with pain. "In here, please." Jonathan yanked the door open. Inside, a young woman, maybe in her 20s, sat gripping the steering wheel, her forehead bleeding from a small cut. Her breath fogged the air, shaky and uneven. "My leg, I think it's stuck," she whispered. Jonathan's chest tightened. His instinctive reaction was to panic. He wasn't a rescuer. He wasn't good in emergencies. He wasn't the kind of man who helped strangers in the snow. At least, he hadn't been. He forced his trembling hands to steady. "Okay, I'm going to help you. Just hold on." He reached inside, pushing the seat back and freeing her leg. She winced in pain, but managed to crouch out of the car with his support. As they struggled toward the chapel, the storm intensified. The wind nearly knocked Jonathan off balance more than once, and the cold bit into their skin like broken glass. Still, he didn't let go of her. Halfway there, she collapsed in the snow. "I can't. It hurts." Jonathan knelt beside her, lifting her onto his back despite the burning in his muscles. "We're almost there. Don't give up." By the time he pushed through the chapel door, both of them were shaking violently. He laid her carefully on the first pew, breathing hard. "Thank you," she whispered, tears mixing with melted snow on her cheeks. "No one else was on the road. You saved my life." Jonathan looked down at his freezing hands, then at the fragile young woman he had carried through the storm. A realization hit him with the force of a blow. In the moment he helped someone else, his own soul had begun to thaw. But the night was not finished teaching him. The hardest truth was still waiting to be revealed. Jonathan wrapped a blanket around the young woman, while Samuel searched the small storage room for first aid supplies. The chapel felt warmer now, not because the storm had eased, it hadn't, but because something inside Jonathan was shifting. He watched the woman breathe slowly, her pain easing, and an unfamiliar thought surfaced. Maybe I was meant to be here tonight. When Samuel returned with a bandage and a small bottle of antiseptic, Jonathan helped him clean the wound. His hands, steadier now, moved with a gentleness that surprised even him. "You're safe," he whispered, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with fragile gratitude. "My name is Clara," she murmured. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he replied quietly. "Anyone would have done the same." But the truth hovered unspoken. The man he had been a day ago would not have stopped. As Clara drifted into a calmer sleep, Samuel motioned Jonathan toward the entrance of the chapel. They stepped outside, just under the wooden archway. Snow still fell, but slower now, like white feathers settling in the night. Samuel folded his hands behind his back. "You have a heavy heart, Jonathan. I saw it the moment you walked in." Jonathan exhaled. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "More than I ever want to say out loud. I pushed people away, hurt people, and I told myself it was strength." Samuel's eyes softened. "Pain disguised as power is a common illness." Jonathan turned his gaze to the dark hills. "I treated you horribly earlier. I judged you, insulted you, and you still helped me tonight." The old caretaker smiled with a tenderness that felt almost fatherly. "What you said hurt, yes. But I've served in this chapel long enough to know something important. People rarely speak from who they are, only from where they're wounded." Jonathan swallowed hard. He had never heard someone forgive him so simply. Then Samuel gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tonight wasn't an accident. You came here searching for shelter, but found what your soul has been starving for." Jonathan frowned. "And what is that?" "Truth," Samuel said, "and truth does not shame you. It frees you." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly the chapel door creaked. Clara leaned against the frame, her face pale but determined. "Jonathan," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." He walked toward her, concerned. "You should be resting." She shook her head slowly. "No, you need to hear this." Samuel stepped aside, sensing something deeper was unfolding. Clara looked him directly in the eyes, gathering courage. "When my car slid off the road, I wasn't driving to see family. I was leaving someone." Jonathan blinked, uncertain. "Leaving someone dangerous," she continued. "Someone who controlled me, made me feel worthless. Someone who took every part of my life and twisted it." Jonathan froze. A strange electricity passed through his chest, because every word she spoke felt like a mirror turned toward him. Clara's voice trembled. "And when I saw you in the road, strong, angry, ready to explode, I thought, God, it's the same kind of man." Jonathan felt the blow hit straight in the heart. Clara lowered her gaze. "But then you came back for me. You carried me through the snow. You protected me. You didn't leave me behind. That's why I need you to hear this." She lifted her eyes again, filled with a quiet, painful truth. "You are not the monster you think you are, but you were becoming one." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Samuel watched silently, knowing the moment had arrived. The breaking point where a soul either collapses or rises. Clara whispered the final words with trembling sincerity. "Tonight didn't just save me. It was meant to save you." Jonathan stood there, shaken to his core, the storm around him finally beginning to fade, but the storm inside him only now revealing its purpose. Jonathan felt something inside him crack open, quietly, painfully, like ice breaking under the weight of truth. Clara's words didn't accuse him, they unmasked him, and for the first time in years, he wasn't angry, he was exposed. Clara leaned against the doorframe, her breath trembling from the effort. Jonathan instinctively stepped forward to help her, but she gently raised a hand. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just stay there. I want you to hear this." Jonathan froze, his heart pounding in a way no business loss, no argument, no failure had ever caused. Clara continued, her voice fragile but steady. I stayed with that man for years because I believed lies he planted in me, lies that I wasn't enough, that my voice didn't matter, that my fears were weakness. And when I saw your face tonight, angry, yelling at God, cursing the road, I recognized the same shadow I lived under. Jonathan closed his eyes, ashamed. I never meant to become that, he murmured. No one ever does, Clara replied softly. The darkness doesn't enter with violence. It whispers. It grows. It convinces you that pushing people away is safety, that control is love, that pride is strength. Jonathan's voice broke. I pushed my wife away. I pushed my son away. I hurt people who trusted me, and all I kept telling myself was that they didn't understand me. Clara nodded with a tenderness that felt almost sacred. Because admitting you're hurting is harder than pretending you're strong. Samuel stepped inside quietly, leaning on his cane. Son, he said gently, the greatest prisons are built from emotions we refuse to face. Jonathan swallowed hard. I don't know where to start. Here, Samuel said, placing a hand over Jonathan's chest. Not with fixing your life, but with telling the truth to yourself. Jonathan felt tears burning behind his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not because he didn't feel, but because he believed tears meant weakness. Tonight, the belief shattered. He looked at Clara, then at Samuel, and finally at the small wooden cross above the altar. The flickering lantern cast a warm glow over it, making the shadow seem to reach toward him. How do I even pray anymore? Jonathan whispered. I've lived so far from God. Samuel smiled gently. God is not where you left him. He's where you finally stop running. Something in Jonathan broke beautifully. He stepped forward, knees shaking, and slowly sank to the floor. Snowflakes drifted through the cracked window, landing softly beside him. He closed his eyes. The words didn't come polished, rehearsed, or holy. They came raw. God, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I've hurt people. I've hurt myself. I pushed away the ones I love. I thought I didn't need you. But tonight, I see how wrong I've been. Please help me. His voice cracked, and a tear slid down his cheek. The chapel fell silent, as if even the storm outside paused to listen. Samuel whispered, Grace doesn't ask where you've been. It asks if you're willing to stand up again. Clara sat beside him slowly, wincing as she moved. She placed her hand over his. You can change, she whispered. I know it, because I saw it tonight. Jonathan opened his eyes, meeting hers. I want to be better. I want to be someone my family isn't afraid of, someone God can trust again. Clara squeezed his hand. Then this storm, this night, wasn't punishment. It was rescue. Jonathan inhaled shakily. The truth felt heavy, but freeing. He had run from God. He had run from responsibility. He had run from himself. But tonight, on a snow-covered Christmas Eve, he finally stopped running. Samuel stepped closer, his voice low and comforting. Repentance isn't about shame, he said. It's about direction. And you, son, have just taken your first step home. Jonathan bowed his head, overwhelmed. Some storms destroy, but some storms are sent to rebuild. The storm finally eased as dawn approached, painting the horizon with soft strokes of pink and gold. Jonathan stepped outside the chapel, breathing in the cold morning air. The world felt new, quiet, washed clean. Behind him, Clara rested peacefully and Samuel prepared warm tea, but Jonathan remained still, letting the silence settle inside him. For the first time in years, his heart was calm. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Apologies would have to be made, bridges would need rebuilding, pride would have to die a little every day. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He whispered into the cold, "Thank you for giving me another chance." The snow under his feet shimmered like tiny stars, and something inside him, something long buried, finally breathed again. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was grace. Maybe it was God showing him that the night he feared the most was the night that saved him. And so, on that Christmas morning, Jonathan walked back toward the chapel, toward the warmth, toward forgiveness, toward a future he no longer felt unworthy of. Because sometimes the miracle you beg for isn't the one that changes your circumstances. It's the one that changes you. If this story touched your heart tonight, take a moment before you go. Because sometimes the message we hear is not an accident. It arrives exactly when our soul needs it most. If you felt that, I want to invite you to be part of this community. Subscribe, so you never miss another story that lifts your spirit when life feels heavy. Like this video, it helps this message reach someone else who may be struggling right now. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, from which city and country are you watching? I read every comment. And it means more than you imagine to see how far these stories travel and how many hearts they touch. Thank you for spending this moment with me. May God bless you, guide you, and remind you every night, even the hardest ones, carries a purpose. We'll meet again in the next story.